In this episode of the Exploring Information Security podcast, how to govern AI.
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I am your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we will be exploring how to govern artificial intelligence, or AI. With me to do that is Walter Haydock, the founder of StackAware. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. Feedback for the show, timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn, and you can rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That's how the show gets to grow, is by you helping rate it. So I appreciate everyone that has done that and everyone that will go do that. If you're interested in getting involved in the community for ExploreSec, you can check out our community page on exploresec.com. We have a Discord channel and a listserv where every once in a while I send out stuff. I'm trying to work on sending out some more stuff. So Walter is someone I've been trying to get on the podcast for a while. So it's good to have him on to talk about, just kind of the how-tos and what you need to be concerned with when you're talking about governing AI, because being in the industry for this long, it's very similar to like, how do you deal with, cloud, APIs pop up, all these different new technologies come out, and then security tries to scramble to figure out how to do it. There's a lot of mistakes that have happened. But I think kind of very similar to some of the other strategies, you can apply those same type of things that you've done for those things in the past as far as methodology, and use them for governing AI. But there are definitely still some nuances you want to be concerned with, and I think Walter does a really good job of breaking those down. So with that, I started by asking Walter to define AI governance.
AI governance, as I define it, has two components. The first is it relates to non-deterministic systems, and it involves and covers the assessment and management of risks related to those systems.
So what does that mean? Like, when you say non-deterministic systems, like, what does that actually mean?
So at a high level, a non-deterministic system means that you are not guaranteed the same outputs for the same inputs. So, for example, 2 + 2 is a deterministic operation. Assuming the laws of physics hold, then it's always going to be 4. However, if you are interacting with a large language model, there are going to be random seeds fed into it. When it's in a deployment environment, there are going to be other factors, model changes that may or may not be perceptible. And that means the outcome or the output of that system is not guaranteed for a given input. So that's what I mean by non-deterministic.
And then the second part of that, and I totally get that, because I feel like I use AI pretty regularly for newsletters, show notes, things like that, and it can definitely spit out a different, even just format or different output each time. I can ask it the same question and it gives me. So I understand that. But what was the second part of what you said? What you thought AI governance was?
The second component of the definition of AI governance is measuring and managing the risk related to non-deterministic systems. That includes cybersecurity risk, but is not exclusive to cybersecurity risk. There are many other risks that AI brings with it: reputation, contractual, regulatory. So it includes all of the relevant risks.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of like it's also a bit of a data privacy risk as well, and that's where I feel like it's maybe more of an impact. But just for clarity, are you more focused on that kind of risk, or the attackers using AI to improve their attacks, or is that kind of out of the scope of what you worry about?
Attackers using AI is outside the scope of what StackAware and I generally focus on. I bucket the AI and security discussion into 3 separate categories that do overlap to a degree. The first one would be AI for security, which would be AI-powered SOCs, machine learning algorithms for fraud detection, things like that. The second category would be AI for hacking. I say hacking because hacking is a neutral term, and the way I use it, it can be ethical or unethical.
Mm-hmm.
So it could include things like automated pen test solutions, but also writing phishing emails or things like that. And then the final category where I focus on is security for AI or security of AI. And that is a piece of the broader AI governance picture.
So is that where I guess the AI governance kind of fits into that third category?
Yes. AI governance completely encompasses that third category and includes other things.
Gotcha. Okay. So like, I guess, how do you get started with that? Like, what do you need to know? What are some of the basics around that?
The first three steps that I would recommend for any organization is one, establishing a policy with respect to what you are okay with and what you're not okay with. Policies, in my mind, are a way to express organizational risk appetite. Then conduct a thorough inventory of all your systems and models, and you may identify things that don't fall within your policy. I would say it makes sense in the early stages to have an amnesty and say, we haven't been regulating this beforehand, but now we are. Just tell us what you're using. No hard feelings, no consequences if you tell us that you're doing something in good faith. And then the third step to do would be a comprehensive risk assessment, looking at your risk appetite established by the policy, and then looking at your assets, your systems, your models, and determining what is within your risk appetite and what's not.
I mean, that sounds a lot like kind of some basic just security IT, right? It's inventory, understand what you have, and then doing that. But it I guess to me, like, how do you get started with that? Because it's already out there. I've seen it. It's getting integrated into all these different third-party systems. Let alone, you got your data team that wants to spin up their own LLMs. It's kind of already out of the box at this point. And so, like, I guess, where do you kind of just go from there? Or is it kind of, you're just going to expect it to be a little bit of chaos until you can kind of get a better understanding of what's going on?
There will definitely be chaos and uncertainty up front, and potentially for a while as you're rolling out an AI governance program. I would recommend using a tiered approach for your risk assessments to help prioritize. So look first at anything that is regulated by a specific law, like Colorado's SB 205, New York City Local Law 144, the EU AI Act, anything that's a cyber physical system, if you have those, autonomous vehicles, for example. Then look at systems that are processing confidential data, so information that you want to protect from disclosure. That could be due to regulatory requirements like protected health information, or it could be for business reasons like protecting trade secrets. And then finally, the last bucket, if you have bandwidth, is to look at systems that are processing publicly available data and don't have any of those high risk characteristics.
Gotcha. So is this something that I guess traditional cybersecurity GRC teams should be handling, or is this more of a combined effort between multiple different departments within an organization?
AI governance is going to be a team sport. That doesn't mean accountability for a system should be diffused throughout an organization. In my opinion, a business leader should own every system or model and be able to make risk management decisions about them. Different organizations handle AI governance in different ways. I'd say 80% of the time, the security team is handling it because they are used to these types of situations. They have a risk management mindset. That doesn't necessarily mean they have to. Other folks that I've seen handle it are privacy teams, because there's a lot of regulatory data and guidance to process. I've seen legal and or compliance teams handle it. I've seen more technical teams like data science teams handle it on their own, kind of self-governing organizations. And then I've even seen at some companies dedicated AI governance functions, which is, I think, very interesting and creates an independent perspective on that risk.
So would the governance function be like a committee or something that's been stood up between multiple groups?
You can certainly have an AI governance committee. I would make 3 recommendations to anyone who's doing that. First of all, make the decision authority clear for the committee. Don't ever allow one person to have a veto unless that person is the cross-functional business leader who is accountable for the system. A second important thing is to have clear decision timelines. So if somebody makes a request and you have a committee, the committee needs to guarantee that they'll respond in a certain timeline. Otherwise, it just becomes a black hole. And then the third recommendation I would have is that the AI governance committee set a risk appetite and preferably pre-approves certain types of activities and certain data sensitivities so that they're not blocking deployment of systems or testing of systems, waiting on a decision, while at the same time applying appropriate guardrails.
Gotcha. What to use a single most urgent like AI specific security vulnerability that organizations should be focused on right now? And when I say vulnerability, that can be more of like a privacy based thing. When I say vulnerability, it's kind of a generalized like risk, or I guess risk would probably be a better term.
The biggest risk that a lot of organizations are overlooking when it comes to AI governance is related to HR. That's because basically every HR system that I've evaluated advertises some sort of AI capabilities. And the common denominator between all the rules and regulations in the United States, but also in the EU, is human resources. So hiring, firing, performance evaluation, things like that. And that is an area where basically every company is exposed. There's a lot of regulatory focus on it. And at the same time, that's not where companies are focusing their risk management efforts.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that. In fact, last year when I was looking for a job, I definitely did like an AI based interview where it's like just record yourself. You could definitely tell behind the scenes they're doing some sort of AI evaluation of probably body language, tone, answer to the questions, things like that. But to your point, I mean, there is a lot of information, not just from like candidates, but from also internal employees, right? I hadn't even thought of that, but that's really interesting that you've called out kind of HR as being one of those things, and you've kind of seen AI start creeping into a lot of stuff, and resume reviews, and like you said, I know a lot of managers that are writing performance reviews with AI.
You mentioned specifically AI video interviews, and believe it or not, there is a law in Illinois that specifically governs AI video interviews. It's called the AI Video Interview Act, and sets out a whole set of requirements specifically for exactly the type of tool that you described.
So that's another interesting thing that I'm getting from this interview is the fact that there seems to be these pockets of laws. You mentioned Colorado, New York. I know California has some stuff, the EU, things like that. Do you feel like some of those laws are kind of just now starting to get going, or are there just quite a bit? I hadn't heard about that law, but that's why I'm asking is, are there already a ton of AI laws that people might just not be aware about, even in their own states?
In the United States, there are already a ton of AI laws at the state and local level, many of which are in force. For example, New York City Local Law 144 has been in force since 2023. And if memory serves correctly, the Illinois AI Video Interview Act has been in force since 2019. With that said, there's a whole new wave of laws coming that are not yet in force, but are even more stringent. For example, Colorado SB 205. California passed a whole series of laws. Most recently, it was actually a regulation, the CCPA, Automated Decision-Making Technologies Regulation. That is coming into force soon. So there's a whole slew of laws that are coming online in the next year.
Has every state come up with an AI law, or are there still some states that haven't got there yet?
No, not every state has developed an AI-specific law. Some of the key standouts there would be Texas, Colorado, California. Utah's have some very specific AI laws passed, for example, regulating mental health chatbots. But other states are in wait and see mode. And just recently, there was reporting that the president said it, that he's going to issue an executive order challenging a lot of these state laws or enforcing an alternative policy, I'll call it. So we're going to see a very dynamic landscape when it comes to state and local level AI regulation in the United States.
Do you feel like in your work with some of these companies that people are prepared, or they're just not aware of some of these laws? And I'm also thinking of like a lot of companies don't just operate in Illinois, right? But they operate in multiple states, but they still have to be concerned with those different state laws, particularly with AI and stuff. Do you feel like companies are prepared, or they're just kind of doing stuff and just kind of not aware of those kind of laws?
Most companies are not prepared for the wave of AI regulation that's coming. And specifically in the HR space, one vendor in particular has made many pronouncements about the applicability of certain laws to its tool, which, after consulting with multiple attorneys, is incorrect. But they are advising their customers in a certain way, which is frankly wrong. And it's just a matter of time before one of their customers or this vendor itself gets swept up in a regulatory action that proves them right or wrong.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting. Are you finding organizations like is there, I guess, risk more associated with some of these laws, or is it from internal employees that are wanting to use a lot of these AI tools?
There's definitely risk external to the organization from a regulatory perspective, but internally, the biggest risk would be related to data confidentiality, in my opinion. Other important risks aside from the regulatory side of things would be reputation impact. So chatbots providing inaccurate or offensive information to customers or other stakeholders. And then the third related issue that I see on a lot of people's radars is not strictly regulatory, but either contractual related to intellectual property ownership, or not necessarily contractual, but related to IP in terms of copyright infringement and understanding what the ownership is of models that are trained on certain data. What is the permissibility of training on certain data? So those are the three big risks I see aside from the regulatory side of things.
All the third parties vendors, right? They're starting to put AI into their platforms. Like is I don't know that I've heard you really necessarily mention that. Is that a big risk, or is that kind of just part of third party at this point? Like how prevalent is that within an organization?
Third-party use of AI is an absolutely critical aspect of AI governance and risk management. For example, StackAware, my company, we do very little in-house development. We're building on top of other platforms, other vendors. We rely on other organizations to protect our data, and that's true for a lot of organizations. Not many are managing their own data centers. So the third-party aspect is absolutely key. I try not to draw too much of a bright line, kind of between first party, third party, because I think organizations sometimes get a little, they can confuse themselves when they get too wrapped around the axle saying, oh, well, we send that over to TPRM or vendor risk management. That's not our issue. I think taking a holistic approach to risk management is really important. And especially with AI, that can include things like how the vendor is securing your data that's in their custody. Are they encrypting it at rest? Or do they have appropriate defenses in place? But then also how you're using the AI system is also critical, because maybe the system by default trains on all the inputs and that's working as intended. According to the vendor, the vendor would say that's not a risk for us. You're just misusing our product if you don't want us to train on your data. So how you use the tool is also important. That's why I think a holistic risk assessment process is key.
Yeah. How much is secure education to employees about these kind of things? How important is that? Or do you feel like policies kind of handle a lot of that stuff?
Education for employees is absolutely critical to AI governance. Policies are the absolute minimum when it comes to establishing a governance program, but you should not expect policies to be self-enforcing. To the maximum extent possible, I recommend writing policies in ways that are one-to-one with how you do business. So at StackAware, what we do is our policies are written in very bulleted, terse language, because every time we're doing something related to that policy, we fire an automation that creates a Jira ticket that lists all the steps of that policy or procedure. So instead of turning kind of fancy words into actions, we just have very dry, blunt language in our policies and procedures, because that converts directly into individual actions that people will take to enforce those policies and procedures.
How much of a fan are you of using AI to write policy? Because one of the things I thought I saw a benefit of because I've written some with them, and again, I don't just use AI and then spit it out, right? But I feel like it does give, to your point, very blunt, kind of practical, plain language to a lot of people, versus before I felt like policies oftentimes were written in very legalized forms and were kind of hard to understand. Are you a big proponent of that?
I think AI is a great tool for writing, especially on the brainstorming, on the drafting side of things, for identifying issues that you may not have considered. And that certainly applies to policy drafting. I think I have a different perspective on the outputs. I find large language models to be incredibly wordy, incredibly obtuse in some ways, and less cut and dry than I would want them to be. I find myself continuously needing to remind ChatGPT or what have you that it needs to use the absolute minimum number of words possible and avoid anything that has unclear meaning or, introduces unnecessary confusion.
Yeah, I can see that. I've definitely seen some bloat for a lot of stuff where I've had to go back through and remove stuff. And I do it all the time with questions where it wants to go into these very elaborate questions. And I'm like, let's just try to get to the simple kind of questions. With as far as strategy goes, I feel like, and I don't know if you're still seeing this, but I felt like a lot of organizations were of two sides. We're going to block everything, or we're going to try to get our hands, wrapped around what's going on and kind of allow it within the environment. For you, which way do you lean on those two approaches?
I agree that there's been a dichotomy, or there have been two different ways that organizations have generally handled AI governance. One is no AI, period, which is impossible. It doesn't make sense. There's no way to enforce that. People are just going to violate that policy because they have to. On the other side of things, you'll see organizations that have taken a gloves off approach when it comes to AI, basically saying, you better use AI, you better accelerate productivity, we're accepting the risks associated with it. That could be an acceptable approach if there were a deliberate process to measure the risk associated with using certain systems, and the organization determined that the risk was justified because of the potential rewards. Very rarely have I seen that happen in the latter case, unfortunately.
Okay, so you've seen a lot more blocking then?
I've seen a lot of blocking and a lot of organizations taking the gloves off, but not having any sort of calculated risk taking. They've been making a reckless risk taking approach.
Yeah, which will come back to bite them, I imagine, at some point in the future. What are the three most actionable steps for anyone that, the next 90 days establishing an AI risk management program?
The three most actionable steps that you could take to establish an AI risk management program would be: one, develop a solid asset inventory of all the systems you're using and look to the third and fourth party level when you are developing that inventory. I wouldn't create a separate list of vendors and then, assets. I would think of them all as the same. They're all either endpoints that you're sending data to, or they're pieces of code that are running inside another service. Number two would be develop an effective and actionable risk management procedure. So that identifies what specific checks you're going to make. That could include tiering based on sensitivity. And then the third most important thing, which could be controversial, is to establish a quantitative way of measuring risk, specifically in dollars of loss expectancy. Because if you use high, medium, low approaches, there's no way to determine whether the controls are cost effective or not.
Do you have a model or methodology that you recommend for trying to tie that to a financial risk?
StackAware is a big proponent of both the Hubbard-Searson method, which is detailed in their book, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity Risk, and the FAIR methodology, Factor Analysis of Information Risk. And we offer a free risk register template that combines the Hubbard-Searson and the FAIR approaches into a single document where you can get, if you need a simplified approach, a single number that represents your annual loss expectancy, or you can build a loss exceedance curve that uses Monte Carlo simulations, which might sound really fancy. It's not as fancy as it sounds, but you can do that too. And we provide that for free. So anyone can download that and see our approach.
That's cool. Yeah, we had the creator of Fair on this podcast to kind of talk about some of that stuff, because I think I absolutely agree with you. I think you need to have. I love that you said quantitative, risk to put some metrics behind it, right? And if you can definitely tie it to financial, I think that speaks to people a lot more. And I think security people have a real hard time with kind of showing that kind of risk in a dollar amount that's really going to speak to executives and leadership a little bit more to take it more seriously. Looking 3 to 5 years ahead, what do you see for AI governance as far as like emerging technology?
Agentic AI is going to be a new or another game changer on top of the advances we've seen from generative AI. So the ability of non-deterministic systems to interact with other non-deterministic systems or existing applications, that is really going to transform the business landscape. And I don't think organizations have a very good handle on how they're going to govern these AI agents. So that's going to be the biggest development over the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Yeah, I can kind of see that. And it feels like it's just adding on top of, kind of the people being behind on the whole, just AI in general, as far as generative AI. Is there anything you'd also like to mention or cover that we haven't discussed?
I would say that when you're building a governance program for artificial intelligence, focus on building a system that allows you to incorporate different requirements into it and adapt accordingly. So these could be things like new laws or regulations. They could be contractual requirements. They could even be business requirements. And focus on building the system correctly so that you don't need to reinvent the wheel anytime there's a change. So, for example, if you built your framework to the EU AI Act specifications because you're operating only in the EU, if you move into another jurisdiction, you're going to essentially need to create another governance program. Whereas if you have a more flexible foundation, for example, ISO 42001, you'll be better served over the long run, and you won't need to reinvent the wheel every time there's a new requirement.
What is ISO 42001?
ISO 42001 is the global standard for building AI management systems. Similarly to ISO 27001, which is focused on how to build information security management systems, it gives you a set of requirements for policies and procedures, as well as technical controls to measure and manage the risk of deploying artificial intelligence.
Gotcha. So it kind of gives you kind of at least a starting point or some you said standards to kind of follow and start implementing.
ISO 42001 is by design quite high level. There are best practices for how to implement it, but it is not highly prescriptive from a technical perspective, nor does it tell you what an acceptable risk criteria or risk appetite for your organization is.
Gotcha. Okay. What resources do you recommend for diving into AI governance?
Some of the best resources that I've seen out there are from the Cloud Security Alliance. Disclaimer, I've contributed to some of them as an editor.
Yep.
I think the AI controls matrix that they recently published was an interesting document that provides a lot of food for thought And at the same time, I don't think necessarily needs to be a comprehensive set of controls that you need to apply, but it gives you a lot of ideas to cover your bases. I'd say if you're interested in AI governance, please follow me on LinkedIn. I'm Walter Haydock. Pretty sure I'm still the only Walter Haydock on LinkedIn. My father has not joined for some reason. He's still sitting on the sidelines. So please give me a follow. I post about AI governance, risk management, and security topics every day.
Cool. Well, Walter, thank you for joining me to discuss AI governance.
Thank you, Tim. Appreciate the invitation.